Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I will be sharing with you 3 different cast-on methods when it comes to knitting. So if that interests you at all, please continue watching and welcome to Knitting 101. So I already have my knitting needles here prepared. I am using a set of 10mm interchangeable knitting needles. This cast-on method will work with any size knitting needles. You don't need the 10mm, but I am using a 10mm pair of knitting needles as well as a size 6 yarn, which is also a super bulky. I'm just using this for teaching purposes, just so you can really see the stitches and how I cast on. But again, it'll work with any size knitting needles, any size yarn. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. So the first cast-on method is probably the most beginner-friendly cast-on method. This is what is known as the loop cast-on method. I used this a lot when I was a beginner in knitting, and honestly it's super easy to do. So here I'm just going to show you how to make a slip knot. Firstly, we just hold the cut tail of our yarn in the palm of our hand and wrap it around our index and middle finger here to create an X facing us. But if you flip your hand to the back, you'll notice these 2 bars. To make the slip knot, we're going to go underneath the first bar and grab the second while flipping our hand back over and removing our 2 fingers. You want to hold both tails with your thumb, and then we're just going to pull on the loop here to secure our slip knot. So to tighten our slip knot here, we're just going to pull on the working tail of our yarn that's connected to the yarn ball or skein, whatever you're using, and you're going to place that on your knitting needle. So to begin the loop on cast method, here we have 1 stitch, which is our slip knot. You're going to take your working tail of yarn here, and we're going to loop it on itself, which gives it the name, the loop cast-on method. But here we're going to have our working tail of yarn on the top of the loop and the tail of yarn that's connected to our knitting needle on the bottom. Okay, I'll show you one more time. Flipping the yarn on itself, we have our working tail connected to the ball on top and the tail connected to the knitting needle on the bottom. So placing your knitting needle through the hole and removing your finger, if you pull on the working tail of yarn, it will tighten your stitch. So now you've made a cast-on stitch. So again, looping the yarn on itself with the working tail on top and the tail connected to your knitting needle on the bottom. Placing your knitting needle through like so, and tightening with the working tail of yarn. And here is the loop cast-on method once you've worked on your project some. This is just a stockinette swatch that I did, but I figured it would be a nice little visual to see how your cast-on method would look on your project. So the second way to cast on is definitely the most traditional and my personal favorite, which is called the long tail cast on method. There are actually 2 ways to achieve this cast on, and I will be showing you both. The first, I'll show you the 2-handed way, but a little trick to long tail cast on so you don't run out of yarn is taking your yarn and wrapping it around your knitting needle. I personally work in stitches of 10, so I'm going to wrap the yarn around my needle until I have 10 loops on the needle, okay? So here I am just showing you, I have my 10 loops, right? And you want to leave a long enough tail, which is your cut end tail, which is in my right hand here, and marking the place where I stopped wrapping with my left thumb, right? We're going to remove that yarn from our knitting needle. I know, this is cast on, why am I taking the yarn off? But there's a very good reason, and it's going to benefit you in the long run for sure. So if I take the yarn that I used, right, and wrap it on itself, that is going to double up the yarn, right? So therefore I have enough yarn for 20 stitches, and doubling it up again, 40 stitches, right? Stay with me. So because we wrapped the yarn around our knitting needle 10 loops, right? I know that yarn is enough for 10 stitches. So if I am folding the yarn in on itself continuously, right? That'll be 10 more stitches. So here I am with the 4 bars of yarn, 4 strands. I know that's 40 stitches worth. Okay, so that is a really cool trick that I learned that will benefit you in the long run. So if you need enough yarn for 200 stitches or 50 stitches, you'll always have enough, okay? But no matter where you end with your yarn, you're going to make a slip knot there. Okay, so taking my working tail of yarn with my thumb and wrapping the cut tail of yarn around my 2 fingers with the X facing you, working on the back of our hand, going under the first bar and grabbing the second bar, right? And tightening that yarn, we've made a slip knot. Okay, so on our left side, we should have our working tail, which is connected to our skein of yarn, and our cut tail, which is not connected to anything, on the right side. I'm going to place my knitting needle through our slip knot here, and just going to give it a good tighten. So to do the two-handed long tail cast on method, I'm going to take my left thumb, okay, holding my working tail of yarn in my left hand, but taking my left thumb, and I'm going to wrap that under and over that strand of yarn while holding my cut tail in my right hand, okay? First, our needle is going to do most of the work when it comes to the long tail cast on method, and meaning we're going to take that needle and wrap it underneath the loop, keeping our thumb in that loop and throwing over the yarn from our right hand around the needle. Taking our thumb here, we're going to pop that loop off of the thumb and onto the needle. Okay, you can tighten your stitch by pulling on the working tail of your yarn. So again, wrapping my thumb, taking my needle here and going underneath the loop and keeping my thumb in the loop, throwing the yarn over with my right hand around the needle and popping that loop off of my thumb onto the needle. And of course, tighten with your working tail of yarn. You can now do the two-handed long tail cast on method. And just showing you one more time. Underneath the loop, throw the yarn with your right hand around the needle and pop that loop off of your thumb onto the needle. So now I'm going to show you how to do the one-handed long tail cast on method. This is my personal favorite and it starts with a slip knot just like all the others. So I'm keeping my working tail of yarn on my left side, but my cut tail of yarn on my right side. So to start the one-handed long tail cast on method, I'm going to take my index finger and my thumb, and we're going to place that between the two tails of our yarn, okay? Using my other 3 fingers to grab and hold the 2 tails of yarn, I'm going to take my 2 fingers and wrap upwards with the yarn, like so, okay? So, 2 fingers between the 2 tails, and wrapping upwards with that yarn. It's going to give you these 2 loops or bunny ears, whatever you want to call them. So just like before with the other long tail cast on method, your needle is going to be doing most of the work. So we're going to wrap underneath the loop that's on our thumb, just like before, but instead we're going to wrap over the loop on our index finger. Popping that loop off of my thumb onto the needle and pulling on the working tail of yarn will tighten our stitch. So again, 2 fingers between the 2 tails of yarn, my index and my thumb, and with my free fingers I'm going to hold the 2 tails. Wrapping upwards will create our 2 loops. And using my needle, we're going to go under the loop on my thumb, but over the loop on my index finger. Popping that loop off of my thumb and onto the needle, and tightening by pulling on the working tail of yarn. We have done the one-handed long tail cast on method, which I know is quite the mouthful, but it's definitely my favorite way to cast on all of my knitting projects. So after completing the long tail cast on method, no matter if you use 1 hand or 2 hands, this is how the stockinette swatch ends up looking. Again, a really classic way, but my favorite way to cast on when knitting. So the third and final way to cast on when knitting is actually using a crochet hook. This cast on method I feel is very, very helpful when it comes to crocheters who want to learn how to knit. So basically I'm just using a 6.5mm crochet hook and creating a slip knot, of course. You can use this method with any size crochet hook, but just because I'm using a super chunky yarn, I'm using the 6.5. But I'm going to place my slip knot onto my crochet hook. And this method is very helpful for people who know how to crochet around objects. But basically, I'm just going to be slip stitching onto my knitting needle, okay? So I'm going to have my crochet hook in my right hand with the yarn behind my knitting needle and the working tail of yarn on my left hand, right? So again, slip stitching onto the knitting needle, okay? I'm going to yarn over with my crochet hook and pull that loop through my slip knot that I created. And now we have one stitch on our knitting needle. So the key to this cast on method is moving the yarn behind the needle, yarning over and pulling it through that loop that was on our crochet hook for a second stitch. Moving the yarn behind the needle again, taking my hook, yarning over, and pulling it through the loop that was on my hook. So this method I feel is very easy for people who know how to crochet, who really want to get into knitting, and also just a really fast and simple way to cast on in general. I really like the way that this cast on method looks. I personally have never used it on one of my projects, but honestly it looks very similar to the long tail cast on method. So I'm just doing this for a total of 10 times, but you can do it however many times you need for however many stitches you need for said project. So now you've reached the end of your stitches, right? You have one final stitch and you need to get this loop off of your crochet hook, okay? So the way to do that, right, is I'm just going to take my hook and pull upwards, and I'm going to place that stitch onto my knitting needle. And removing my crochet hook, I have now completed the crochet cast on method. Okay, so that was completed with just slip stitches, and it really looks similar to the long tail cast on method. But again, a great way for crocheters to learn how to cast on when it comes to knitting. And here is our stockinette swatch worked up after completing the crochet cast on method. Again, it looks very similar to the long tail cast on method, but again, very easy for people who have crochet knowledge. I definitely will give this a try on future projects. Okay, and those are the 3 different kinds of cast on methods that I feel are very easy for beginner knitters. Let me know, have you ever tried any of the 3 cast on methods? The long tail cast on method is personally my favorite. I recently just learned the crochet cast on method, and I think that is a very good cast on method for people like me who started to crochet and wanted to get into knitting. Of course, I'm very familiar with the crochet hook, but yeah, it looks very good. I've never tried that cast on method with any of my projects, but honestly I think I might, because it looks just like the long tail cast on method without all of the finicky kind of extra yarn that you typically need when using the long tail cast on method. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed this installment of Knitting 101. If you missed the first video, please go back where I discuss the different kinds of knitting needles and the pros and cons when it comes to those different types of knitting needles. But with that, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Please subscribe if you're not already, as I will be posting a new installment of Knitting 101 every single Monday for as long as I can, and as long as you guys enjoy them. So I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you with my next video here on this channel. Bye!